Welcome to the Teaching Journeys podcast, hosted by Dave Roberts. Humanity possesses a unique skill, the ability to pass knowledge from one generation to the next. This podcast embraces that ability, offering learning opportunities through conversations with extraordinary guests. Dave aims to leave a positive mark on individuals around the world. So before you dive into today's episode, please share this podcast with your network, including friends, family, and colleagues. And please consider leaving a rating or review. Your support makes all the difference.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Teaching Journeys podcast. I'm your host, Dave Roberts, and today it is my pleasure to have as my guest Dr. Kirsten Viola Harrison. Kirsten is a trauma psychologist, spiritual integration expert, and the founder of Soulwise Solutions. For over 25 years, she has worked with individuals facing deep psychological and spiritual transformation, including those with dissociative identity disorder, schizophrenia, and near-death experiences. Her passion lies in helping people navigate life's most complex transitions with compassion and clinical insight. Her groundbreaking new book, I, Sean A., the story of a homeless intersex woman who inspired a community, co-authored with Sean A. Smith, tells a riveting true story of an intersex woman living with schizophrenia who defied all odds. Together, they challenge outdated medical practices and advocate for dignity, inclusion, and soul-deep healing. Kirsten, welcome to the Teaching Journeys podcast. I've been looking forward to our conversation for some time now.
Thanks, Dave. Likewise, I'm very excited to be here.
And we have to give a shout out to one of our favorite people, Candace Snyder. You were a guest on Candace's podcast, Passion, Purpose, and Possibilities. She emailed me and said, Dave, you got to meet Kirsten. I think she'd be a great fit for your program. We talked. We found that we aligned on so many different levels, spiritually, philosophically. And then we just said, hey, let's do a podcast episode. So here we are doing one.
Absolutely. And we love Candace. She's absolutely the best, connector of like-minded souls. So shout out to Candace as well.
She's got a heart of gold.
Yes.
For sure. So, but anyway, Kirsten, my first question for you is please tell our listeners about the experiences that have shaped your life path and your life passions today.
Okay. So I grew up in a family that was very other-centered, philanthropically minded. My parents were immigrants and they had grown up in wartime in Europe. And my dad he was Cambridge educated, but had grown up in poverty and was very attuned to the needs of others and very sensitive to what it feels like to create a village and have people be allies for people that are struggling a little bit more. So I kind of took that sensibility all through my childhood, all through my reading, all through my school. And I met somebody in high school who eventually became my first husband, who had been adopted from a well-meaning family, had no idea how much trauma he had endured when he lived in an orphanage in South America. And so there was a lot of PTSD, trauma, dissociative disorder going on in my marriage because all of these things were now in the safety of a relationship that was secure. They were all starting to show themselves so that they could also be healed and transmuted. That was a wonderful kind of learning experience for me and also an impetus for me to go on and do my studies at Georgetown, get my psych degree, then go on for a PhD. I did some medical stuff in between. I did some research in between with lots of different variants of PTSD, not just the typical kind of child abuse path that I was on in terms of understanding and learning, but also kids who have had a lot of medical interventions and kids who have had glioblastomas and things and how their families coped. And then that segued into a lot of study with near-death experiencers because sadly, a couple years into that relationship, my brother passed away in a boating accident. And the tragedy of that, obviously, how it affected the family, but also my coping became the same thing that it was in the trauma studies, which is bibliotherapy, just going to every book known to man, because of course we didn't have the internet back then in the 80s. And so I just kept powering through, understanding through other people's lived experiences. And then, of course, 35 plus years in the field, I've heard so many different stories and witnessed so much profound healing that I just feel like it's the biggest gift in the world to be given such a like a bird's eye and then close up view to somebody's inner process and how they get through, all of the triumphs and tragedies and the things we have to endure in this lifetime. So that's kind of what had started me on this mission and propelled the mission and sustained the mission.
Yeah, and I mean, for those in my audience that don't know what dissociative identity disorder is, that was this is the new term for what used to be called multiple personality disorder. And
Yes.
and obviously you've worked with some very challenging
Yeah.
individuals with unique challenges that they'll bring into the clinical situation. But it sounds like
Yeah.
from a young age, that's
Yeah.
what you were destined to do.
It's actually interesting. My dad, for my 18th birthday, had given us a trip to go across Siberia and the Trans-Siberian Railroad and all the way into China from Moscow. It was the most incredible experience. I was trying to study Russian at the time, but I had picked up in one of the big hotels in Moscow in a bookstore that we were allowed to go to at the time, because this was before, perestroika and everything. Uh, I picked up the book Sybil, and that, of course, was the true account, and her analyst, Cornelia Wilbur, ended up becoming kind of the grandmother of the field of, what used to be called MPD, like you said.
Mhm.
And then the grandfather of the field, Ralph Allison, actually became my mentor years later and worked all through the dissertation process with me. So he introduced the spiritual side to MPD and the whole notion of an inner self helper that kind of coordinates an internal system when a child is really struggling. And so that book on that trip at 18 years old kind of also forged the path forward that who would have known years later that would have become my complete passion and mission.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what we think we come into this life for isn't what we end up
Yes.
doing in this
Oh,
lifetime,
yes.
which
Yes.
always proves that gods or the universe or spirits, however you conceptualize your higher power or deity, always has a better plan than we do. So,
Absolutely. And I remember my dad saying I was in a family of 5 at the time, and so they were in a car of 4, and I was in with a bunch of Swedish people in my car. And I remember I was just reading, 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 and he was like, "Could you poke your head out the window and just sort of look at Mongolia here?" And I'm like, "What is there to look at? A few yurts. I'm in my butt." And so, you just never know when something really grips you, obviously, there's a path there somehow, and
uh,
you have to listen to it. It's really important. I wouldn't have known any of that when I was 15, 16, 17, but then all of a sudden it all just opened up.
well, and obviously at 18, you trusted your inner voice too.
True. That is very true, and had a family that encouraged that exploration.
Mhm. Want to talk about Shawnee. For those of you who
Yeah.
are going to see the YouTube version of this podcast, you're going to see in
Yeah.
Kirsten's
There she
background
is.
the poster of the cover, I Shawnee, with a
Yeah.
picture of Sean A.
Yeah.
So tell our audience how you met Shawnee and what is the impact that they've made on you both personally and professionally?
So, Shauna was somebody who, when we first moved to La Jolla, my ex-husband was a tennis pro. He had these kind of long dreadlocks, and he was um, definitely excited to meet new people to play tennis with. And so we were um, we were sitting at the grocery store, I think one day. No, we were sitting at the tennis court, but then we went to the grocery store, and all of a sudden, Sean, who had always been hanging out at the tennis court, completely excited and ready to play, 6'5", African American, very muscular, collegiate athlete. All of a sudden, at the grocery store was now Shauna with long flowy wig and like a bikini top and a bright pink skirt. And I remember thinking, oh, I wonder what's going on there. I'm really interested as a psychologist. So I struck up a conversation with her and bought her a Starbucks drink, and eventually kind of came to realize over a long period of time that she was unhoused. I had no idea at the beginning that she had been living on the streets for 8 years. And she was so exuberant. Everyone in the community knew her, and so completely, wonderfully passionate about people. And so over time, I was giving her clothing. Eventually, one night, I couldn't handle the thought that she was freezing in the rain. And I put her up in a hotel, and I promised her from that night on, I am never going to let you get back on the street. I have no idea how I'm going to do this, but I will help you. And so that turned into a GoFundMe. It turned into calls to the editor, newspaper things, the San Diego Tribune, like the Tribune ran the story. So we did. And so when I say we, I went to my group of friends and was just like distraught and said, can we help? Can we figure out how everybody can find a way to pull their resources here and help? And so, 10 years later, she's never been on the street. She's been in a beautiful apartment. And it's just been a wonderful journey. And through that journey, I did realize, however, and I think that's why I was getting so passionately involved from the beginning, that she did have schizophrenia, but a very rare subtype called dissociative schizophrenia. So Dr. Colin Ross, who's big in the trauma field, had written and proposed this subcategory, written a book about it. And I recognized it in Shauna and in all my work with DID and lots of different kinds of DSM labels. I had never come across somebody who was kind of just the perfect mix of somebody who had a lot of insight and a lot of trauma resolution in the way that she approached life, yet at the same time suffered from schizophrenia, which is very much a biologically brain-based condition. And she also walks half a marathon a day. Her movement therapy is what allows her to keep going forward and work through her mental distress. She's opted not ever to take medicine. It's not necessarily been so much of a conscious choice as I don't want anything to mess with my physicality and my athleticism, and the sometimes the side effects, the cardiac effects were just too much for her to handle and think about. So here we are. I just have forged this friendship. I taught her how to text. I got her an iPhone. I've been helping her kind of get caught up into the 21st century. She hadn't taken a plane in 17 years. I took her to Europe so that we could attend all of the Pride events and she could represent intersex, because this year we went to World Pride, Euro Pride in Lisbon, Paris Pride, London Pride. We even went to Iceland because they're very LGBT friendly. The thing that was her platform was very much speaking out about intersex and speaking out about how confusing it can be if you're in a body that you don't even know is what is the foundational biology of your body. And intersex, for those who don't know, is what we used to call the former hermaphrodite. So she's just been an incredible harbinger of what it looks like to be resilient, what it looks like to have constant faith that there's going to be a better tomorrow around the corner. And she inspires me every single day. At one point in our journey, after like 2 years, the GoFundMe, the angel investor I'd gotten, it started to run out. And I knew I was going to have to pick up the slack, which was fine. And I have for 8 years on my own. However, I thought, wouldn't it be wonderful if people knew more about her story and people got inspired about how she kept positive through the most horrendous situations? And so we together started working on her story. I would interview her at length. Then COVID hit, and we had a lot more time for her to she wanted to move to Palm Springs. So we moved her to Palm Springs. She got very invested in texting me long things about different aspects of questions I had asked that she hadn't covered in the interview. And so over time, we just put all of that together, and here we are, wrote the book, and it was released in May. And it's just been a really fun journey since then.
First of all, before we go on, I need to apologize to both you and Shauna for mispronouncing her name in the beginning of the podcast.
Oh, no, because sometimes she's Sean, sometimes she's Shauna.
Okay.
So I guess I should clarify as well. Dave, you're so wonderful. I should clarify as well that I usually call her Shauna because she told me that she spent 50 years on this planet as Sean. And so now the next 50 is Shauna's. And so mostly I interact with how she presents as Shauna.
Well, because you've interacted with her as Shauna, I am going to refer to her as Shauna.
Okay.
So I want to extend that respect to her through our
Oh,
podcast. So,
thank you. That seems to be all about your energy, is being respectful.
well, you're welcome. So you mentioned the book,
Uh-huh.
Shauna. Tell our audience about what the book is about. What was the experience for you writing it with her?
Yeah.
And what do you want readers to take away from it?
So there are so many chapters that deal with all disparate aspects of what she's gone through. Like one of the chapters that's my favorite is synchronicities because there's so many synchronicities around her. It's astounding. And I feel like she's a walking spirit. I mean, there's no other person I've ever met that could conjure up so many different energetic kind of like moments. There's just something in there for everybody. The people who want to understand, how does your early family life impact certain choices? How did somebody who's been out of the sphere of technology and basically any kind of computer age for so long kind of then get caught up and then now she's taken off? I mean, her Soulwise team platform on TikTok and Instagram, I mean, she's getting videos with over 1 million views. So she's just hit the ground running. And it's just really heartening her years as a basketball collegiate athlete and the struggle of what it was like trying to come terms with intersex. She said, my sex is not male, my sex is not female, my sex is male, female. 101 anatomy, please help because who can explain this? So the book, I think the biggest part that I take away and the biggest part that I felt moved so many years to keep writing was because no matter what happened, her positivity just shone through. She would walk 4 miles to the beach shower, even though there was one a lot closer, because she knew she had to keep going, stay positive, get some exercise, took a freezing cold shower. She never had a towel, but then it was like the goodwill of strangers, the goodwill of the community was something that she excelled at sort of bringing together. And then she in turn did so many favors for all the local businesses. And I just thought this is the most beautiful, heartwarming example of community and
Mhm.
how we all belong to each other and how we're all just trying to go through our little life experiences, but we're connected to something so much bigger. So that to me is kind of the why I would love people to read the book because I feel like there's a chapter for everybody to keep them going in the darkest times.
Yeah, I mean, regardless of biology, we all have the
Yeah.
same ideology, you know?
And we all have the same kind of infusion of another realm that kind of works through us is
Mhm.
absolutely my belief. And the belief I've kind of sustained over all these years working with clients in so many different kinds of settings. And I've just seen it at play so many times. And Shauna is just a wonderful example of resilience and just getting on,
Mhm.
just getting on with it.
Yeah. And I meant to say, regardless of ideology, we all have the same biology. We're part of the human race.
Yes, yes, yes,
And
yes.
that's what unites us as a community.
Yes. And when you meet somebody that is a little bit outside of your comfort zone, I'd say give them a chance,
Mhm.
give them a chance to show themselves in their full human beauty. And there was a point in all of this journey with Shauna that was diagnosed with a kind of scary diagnosis at the time. And the doctors were very dire about their prognosis, which at the time they said I had a year to live. Then they did a biopsy. They said, "Oh, we changed our mind." But all of this was extremely confusing and mind blowing for me as a mom with 3 kids. And Shauna showed up for me every day on text. Doc, how you doing? Hey, what did the doctors say today? And it was just unbelievable that this person that I thought for the rest of the time I was going to be helping out, she helped me so much, just like people in my inner circle. And I was so heartened and I was so humbled. And I thought, this is why we take a chance on people because the whole
Mhm.
evolution of life is to be interconnected and interwoven and to share energy with each other.
If we can do that, we could see each other's souls and we can look beyond,
Yes,
yeah,
I
we can look
know.
beyond the physicality and see the pure love that exists within all of us.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yes.
Kirsten, I wanted to ask you, what are some of the common misconceptions that individuals have about intersex and transgender individuals? And I know there's a bunch of them, but what have you seen to be the most common ones that seem to surface over and over and over again?
Okay, so I think that the distinction between transgender and intersex, a lot of people lump them together. What I understand with transgender, and Shauna is very good friends with the mayor of Palm Springs, and she was the first trans mayor in the nation, when the former Palm Springs mayor. She would talk about that deep feeling in that something was misaligned from very early age and that it was very confusing because it didn't quite feel right. I think that there's an overlap there with intersex because Shauna always said there was a deep confusion about who she was and how she fit in the world and that she always felt like something was a little off. However, with intersex, there's a biological difference where doctors with ambiguous genitalia, if a child is born with ambiguous genitalia, the doctors used to just talk to the parents and say, we need to make a decision and let's decide for the child, which is horrific. And Shauna, we've written things again with the United Nations Human Rights Commission about the importance of not performing these medicalized surgeries when the child is little and letting the child really come to terms with what they want to do later and how they feel like they want to best express who they are. But the biggest thing that Shauna describes as the difference between being transgendered and intersex is that she says when she's Sean, she's fully Sean. In his experience, his history, she's fully Sean. And when she's Shauna, she's fully Shauna in her experience, her history. And it's a very congruent, I'm not trying to kind of move in one direction or the other. It's very much this is who I am here and this is who I am here. And so that straddling of worlds is something she has to navigate all the time at every turn. So for instance, when she was very much Sean in La Jolla at the tennis court, she was very much Sean. When she was Shauna, she had her wig, she had her full expression of Shauna to the extreme. Now in Palm Springs, she's sort of a mix of both. So she has her bald head, her baseball hat, no wig, but a bikini top, kind of a sports bra, and then leggings, and then some very masculine running shoes. And so she's really kind of melded the two now for a more kind of congruent presentation. But I would say the discrimination that both trans and intersex communities go through is unbelievable. And they do get lumped together a lot. And the kind of distinctions, people aren't making them. They just look at people that are trans and intersex and just put them in a category of you guys are different. And Shauna is trying to destigmatize what it means to be born into a body that is very confusing and that you don't even recognize and change. She emphasizes this as well. It changes every day but based on hormones, based on different presentations of things, obviously in intimate relationships, she talks about how she's sort of been avoidant of that for decades because it just got really confusing. And so, and then with the trans community, I can't really speak as much about trans because I don't know their experience as intimately as I've gotten to know Shauna's. But definitely the sense of discrimination is very, very powerfully connected with both groups and the need to have to explain oneself to people. And that is something that we take for granted that we don't have to every day when we walk out. We're not like a lightning rod for all of society's issues. We just go out and do our day. Whereas Shauna talks about how every single day, all of these things are projected on her and she has to deal with them when they're not anything that she should have to deal with. So she
Well,
gracefully handles it all, I might say.
well, it's obvious. The thing I like about
Yeah.
is the process of integration. She honors who she is as Sean. She
Yes.
honors that history and the
Yes.
present day incarnation of Sean, and she
Yes.
honors the history of Shauna
Yes.
and in the present day incarnation of her. She's integrated those very nicely. And as you know,
Yes.
dealing with dissociative identity disorder, it's integrating those alter parts of our personality to function
Yes.
cooperatively as one unit.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
she has done that.
Yes.
And
Yes.
she
That's
has
beautifully stated.
Yeah, she has
Yes.
done that. And there was something you mentioned about intersex individuals and transgender individuals having to
Yeah.
justify why they're intersex or why they're transgender.
Yes.
I remember as an undergraduate college student, I took the human sexuality course,
Mm.
and we had an individual come into the class who was gay, and I knew him because I grew up with him. And the
Yeah.
first thing he said to me, and Kirsten has always
Yeah.
stayed with me,
Yeah.
I am not going to justify why I'm homosexual to you.
Yes.
I'm not going to
Yeah.
ask you to justify why you're heterosexual to me.
Ah,
And
beautiful. Yeah.
that was powerful. In other words,
Yeah.
look at me for who I am. Look at me
Yeah.
for shared values. Look at me
Yeah.
for what I represent. Can you
Yeah.
have a conversation with me? Can we align on a lot of different levels, spiritually and value wise? Don't judge
Yeah.
me based on who I choose to love, how my body looks.
Yeah.
To him, that was irrelevant. if you look at it in advanced spiritual circles, the body is just a vehicle for
Oh,
tran
exactly.
transmitting higher
Yes.
spiritual messages anyway. And Shauna is
Yeah.
obviously a very highly evolved spiritual being
Oh, yes.
in an intersex body.
Yes, and what's so interesting, so she's got this super fun, cool personality, kind of like your best basketball buddy that can joke with the guys, and then at the same time sit there and talk about purses with the women. And she has sort of a diva like Diana Ross kind of personality. She said her idealized mom is Tina Turner, her whole life. But what's fascinating is if you look at her conversations with people, if you were to just to pass by in a slow moving car, there's the time she's having a tea with the guy who drives a Lamborghini in a suit, and they're just hanging out, talking basketball. And then there's her talking to the little kids in the community and being very much like the teacher that Shauna actually is because she's got a 4-year teaching degree. She's a PE teacher. And it's just like, it's amazing how she kind of just chameleon like blends into every conversation and is so able to match the energy. Yet at the same time, when you look out, you're seeing this guy in a suit very proper. And then you see Shauna in her wig and her sports bra, and you're like, you don't even think anything of it. Like you get past all of the outward stuff because you're seeing that there's a soul to soul connection going on in every single conversation. And to me, that's what's the beauty of Shauna is she can do that like no one I have ever met in my entire lifetime. And that is why I call her walking spirit. I mean, among many other synchronicities that happen around her, but she's just a beautiful reminder of how we place all those labels and we place all those judgments. If you're just open to how someone's energy is showing itself, it's incredible the kinds of beautiful moments that you can co create. So I would hope more people could do that.
I would hope so too. Look past the labels, look past
Yeah.
the physical appearance and take a look at
Yes.
what does that person have to offer? Where do we align? Um,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
can I have a relationship with this individual based on shared values and shared ideology?
Yes.
I,
And she is the most spiritual. She's the most godly person I've ever met. She went to a Christian college. She was raised with a pastor that was her stepfather. She attends 4 online church services a week. And I was raised by contrast with lots of different religions. And we would travel the world and go to the Buddhist temple and the Hindu temple. And that was my life experience as a young person. It's just so beautiful to me how Shauna has such a soul filled with integrity, filled with seeking higher truths, and filled with seeking the best of people. I do think that aside from the discrimination, she does sadly endure a lot of discrimination and harassment on the daily. But even then, she handles it with grace. But aside from those moments, she's always just trying to be, a force for good and a force for positivity. And, her mental illness is a real struggle. I was around her in Europe. We were traveling for 3 weeks to do all these different pride events. And there were times that schizophrenia really took off, and I was watching a lot of delusional processes going on, and she still tried to snap out of it, break through, and then still stay connected, and then I was kind of a translator between the people looking at her, the people trying to make a judgment, and then with a smile, I would turn to Shauna and just say, "Hey, Shauna," and then she would pop back into what we call our reality, and go on as if nothing had happened. And so it's kind of like, what if we could all just do that? What if we could just meet other people's, differences, regardless of how they present, with just much more openness, compassion, joy, positivity? It's like, what would the world look like?
Absolutely. And then, that brings another point is that the misunderstanding and the misconceptions around schizophrenia. It's that basically
Yes.
schizophrenia is a medical condition that's due to an
Yes.
excess amount of dopamine.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
one of the
Yeah.
other things I've learned about working with individuals with schizophrenia is that they are highly susceptible to stress,
Yeah.
especially through the sudden changes. And I'm sure her
Yes.
traveling overseas had to constitute something that was
Yeah.
temporarily out of her comfort zone. And
Yes.
individuals with
Yeah.
schizophrenia will tend to decompensate and become
Yeah.
symptomatic in response to the stress brought about by change. But
Yes. Yeah.
obviously, Shauna has managed her with the help of you and other members in the community and her team have been able to manage her symptoms so she can basically be grounded back in reality just through a few simple
Yeah.
prompts, some
Yes.
reassurance, and
Yes.
given her the ability to adjust to those new surroundings.
Yes, I mean, there were two distinct times. So one time I was noticing you're not wanting to become part of somebody's system when you're around someone who's schizophrenic. Like sort of a cardinal rule. But because I'm so involved in Shauna's life in every which way, I guess I've been part of the system, but I wasn't aware of that until we would be out somewhere. And let's say I did something silly like forget where I put the train tickets or something.
Mhm.
She would kind of be talking to her inner voices, but sort of like to her, they feel like they're coming from the outside. And so she would be saying Doc, and I was kind of looking, going, oh, she's not talking to me. She's talking to Doc within her system somehow. And so then when I would press and say, hey, Shauna, like, tell me about that. Like, I'm right here. Tell me about what's that Doc saying? She would say, Doc, don't push. Like, and so I knew where my kind of limits were, where I could kind of just, where I should sort of stay away, but at the same time, also try to kind of get in there enough where I could understand what was going on. And one time she was dealing with a lot of kind of like criticism from her inner system.
Mhm.
And so we were at this beautiful Galerie Lafayette, this gorgeous like shopping center with this beautiful dome in front of us, ahead of us. And we were sitting across from each other. So the surroundings are beautiful and the beautiful people trying on the perfumes and whatever. And then there's Shauna kind of getting more and more decompensated.
Yeah.
And so I just looked soul to soul. And I feel like I saw that person way deep inside around all that noise, behind all that noise. And I said, Shauna, I can't imagine how you go through this every day with a smile on your face. Every day you try to see the best, you do your best, you wake up, you just greet the day. Yet all day long, you're getting this barrage of voices and criticisms and whatever. And for the first time ever, I felt like I reached her way behind the mental illness, if that makes sense. And she said, Doc, you have no idea what a struggle it is. And you have no idea how much that means to me, basically, that you just saw that. And I was like, oh, this is the power of witnessing. This is the power of saying, hey, I can't believe you just had that situation in the hospital. How'd you get through it? Or whatever it is that we could witness in somebody. The power of that is just unbelievably healing. And even with someone with schizophrenia, where their whole brain is wired, it's very neurodivergent and it's wired very
Yep.
differently. There's still the soul behind there that you can reach and be like, maybe with a hand on the table, like it's all going to be okay or whatever you can do. And so my passion is really about just be a good human and be a good, ally and be a good person to kind of, if you see the elderly person trying to cross the street, offer the hand. I mean, these things really don't take a lot of effort. And with somebody with schizophrenia, which is, as you very aptly noted, is so kind of, maligned and people are so fearful. To be honest, schizophrenic people are no more dangerous than anyone else. In
Yep.
fact, I would have a much harder time with the unpredictability of somebody on substances
Yep.
any day than somebody with schizophrenia or DID. And in the press, in the movies, it gets sensationalized, but really it's somebody just minute to minute trying to get through in their own way. And they're really not going to be just violent out of the blue. This is just not normally how it is. Does that align with your experience as well?
It sure does. Yep.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
essentially, our job is not to destroy what their version of reality is because their
Oops.
version is based on what they believe. But our
Yeah.
job is to show them the difference between what's real and what isn't real
Yes.
and get them to integrate those two worlds. And we do it
Yeah.
as that person is receptive to us doing it. We take it in small baby steps to try to establish
Yes.
that relationship.
Exactly. I mean, that the movie A Beautiful Mind shows that
Yep.
so beautifully when it's like we can see that the people aren't there, but the other people around can see that. The way they depicted it, I thought was so sensitive and gentle about why somebody really can do wondrous things if you just give them that little bit of support and that little bit of coaxing. And I will say that on the day of our book signing, I had never seen Shauna go a full day without kind of the doc, ma'am, like all these gestures and things that she does, which are part of her schizophrenia. She went the whole day very much congruent, and people wouldn't necessarily know it. Sometimes her legs would shake, and sometimes she would do little gestures to keep
Hmm.
people at bay. But for the most part, she knew it was super important that day to stay on message, stay on task. And she was on a big stage in front of a lot of people. And she was able to do that. But then every time she looked at me, I gave a smile. Other people would give a thumbs up. And it was just like those little moments of encouragement go a long way. So not, I guess, destigmatizing mental illness, like have people get educated and have people also realize that energy is everything. And so just like I have a stepdaughter who has special needs, and just like with anyone with neurodivergence, energy is how they get through life. They rely on that feel. And so when you can bring a positive field of energy around somebody, that is going to most times bring the level of behavior and
Mhm.
awareness up. And I think that that's what we should all strive to do.
Absolutely. And do it with compassion.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. And make it your mission to just sort of get through this life with like doing no harm. Like
Mm,
let's all just sort of when somebody's in need. I mean, there were times I had to translate Shauna's things to the police officers because she was looking very erratic and people were running and they were scared. And I was like, no, this is her schizophrenia. And then as soon as the police officer would actually calm down and say, hey, I hear your name's Shauna, it'd be very, she would be like, hey, how you doing? And
mhm.
very relatable. You would never know 5 minutes later that that had just transpired. So let people show themselves in a beautiful way by being a beautiful soul in front of them and then giving that kind of energy, that higher vibrational energy, something to interact with.
And that translates to I can feel safe in your presence.
Yes, absolutely. Same thing as, cardinal rule in therapy with
Yeah.
therapeutic alliance. Like you
Yeah.
want somebody when somebody's going into a child state, if there's a child alter that's hiding under the table in therapy, I used to sit on the floor and I'd peek under the table and be like, okay, so what's going on here? And
Mhm.
that's just honoring what's showing itself.
Mhm. Yep. Absolutely. Honoring it instead of judging it or running away from it or trying to
Yes.
change it or trying to impose your will to have a different outcome. So it's just go with
Yes.
the flow and whatever presents, we deal with it.
Oh, I used to have to try so hard with my daughter because when my stepdaughter came into our lives, she would try to get this little one to do things to her will. And I was like, that is never going to work with her because she is wired differently. And so you have to come at it a different way. Maybe talk about what Elsa and Frozen would say. And then all of a sudden she'll listen to you. She can hear you and it's a process. And when people are very linear in their thinking, or my daughter is very, she ended up studying at Johns Hopkins, so that's the kind of girl she is, but trying to be very linear about this is how it should be, and I'm going to try to make you do this, that goes out the window. And I think too many people in society feel like it needs to be conforming to what their preconceived notions are. I can't tell you the opening that's happened in my soul having befriended Shauna for 10 years. I mean, I always thought I was a very open person, open minded, open spirited, warm person. Yet Shauna has taken that to a whole new level because I really had to dig deeper to figure out how best to sometimes come in to her energy field with a non-threatening energy.
Our friends typically challenge us to be better human beings, to be more compassionate human beings, to become
Yeah,
more aware, and to constantly
yeah,
strive for improvement. And it sounds like Shauna has had that
yeah.
impact in your life.
Oh, absolutely.
One other question I want to ask you. There's actually a couple more
And
questions I want to ask you, but this one, how does Shauna's gifts, her path, how does this reframe the whole narrative about homelessness?
ooh, I like that question. I think that it's so important to have somebody feel seen because for so many of us, the homeless are just sort of in the background noise. They're just not even human anymore. The dehumanization is incredible. Yet somehow, when I understood what it was like for Shauna, I could never fully understand. When I understood a little bit about what it was like for her to go to CVS at night. The late night manager would go to the back and get her some boxes that then she could break down for cardboard for that next night's sleep outside. It's just, she had this great relationship with people and they're all human to human. And then Shauna goes and sleeps on the cardboard. The other person goes home and sleeps on their bed. And it's like the amount of dehumanization that happens is just so tragic. And so many people, not one person would ever choose homelessness. And it's such a formidable a bunch of obstacles to get past once you've slid to that level. And as Shauna describes it, she was working way overtime at the Boys and Girls Club. She was starting to have a bit of a manic, almost unraveling, and she couldn't pay her bills. And one thing led to the other. Then she started sleeping in her car. And then one day the car got towed. And she said, and I realized I was, on the streets. And she said it was Doc. It was scary. It was very scary that first night. And then she sort of just started to adapt. And I think for me, one's personality style comes out whether one is housed or not, because the homeless outreach team of the San Diego Police Department recognized something in Shauna, that with all her mood walk therapy she was doing every night, that she could be the eyes and ears of the police department, and she could be the one to also help with other people who are struggling, like with not being housed. And so her class leadership, which happened way back in the day, was still showing itself even homeless. So I would say that my understanding of homelessness has broadened to see the strengths, see the survival strengths that are being elicited by this very incredible, trying period in somebody's life. And if they can do these things, oh my gosh, what could they do if they were actually given shelter and if they were actually given the
Mhm.
sense of belonging? And so I've just been more and more inspired to I've always been that person to help every random person, but I've been more inspired to try to meet them where they are. So I was given an example on another podcast about there's a local homeless man who was always barefoot, and it looked so uncomfortable to me, of course. And so I tried to give him a pair of shoes once. I tried to give him a $20 bill once. He refused it. I tried to give him a pair of shoes. He refused it. So instead, I went over to the local trash can that I knew he always kind of hung around, and I sort of sized up his feet and I put the shoes in the trash can so that he could find them. And when he found them, he took the pair of shoes.
Mhm.
So, I don't know if he ended up wearing them ever, but it was like he got the shoes. So you have to sort of start to see, like, sort of almost study somebody a little bit. If there's a homeless person in your area and you see their movements and you see how they're going about life, maybe kind of try to figure out what might be their most needed thing, or what might be a way that you could just make a little human connection. Because Shauna talks about even the people who left a little baby shampoo at the time near her, for washing up, or a little $5 bill at night. And then she would wake up to a $5 bill sitting there. These things made her start the day feeling like a human being again. If we have an abundance of resources in our own inner selves and our own lives to be able to get through the day, give a little bit of that to somebody else, and that just might fill their cup for the day.
And in turn, they may fill somebody else's cup, regardless
Uh,
of their circumstances.
exactly. And that's what we want, and that's what we hope, and that is the ripple effect of what we all create.
Absolutely. Kirsten, one of my last questions for you,
Uh-huh.
and I'm going to frame this a little differently,
Okay.
because usually I will ask the guest what takeaway that they want to leave with our audience, ultimate wisdom. But I'm going to ask you to speak from both yours and Shauna's perspective, since you know her so well.
Yeah.
What is one absolute takeaway that you and Shauna would want to leave with our audience today?
Uh, Literally take a chance on people that are outside of your comfort zone, and you might be hugely surprised at how incredibly connected we all are and how similar we all are. And if we can get past all the stereotypes and the barriers that divide us, it is the most rewarding, beautiful experience. And then we can lend our shared humanity and expertise, and we can just keep evolving in an ever widening circle of humanitarian efforts and goodwill. And I feel like that is what the world needs today. I feel like both Shauna and I feel like that's what we try to bring to the world. And that's what we try to bring with her story. And it's not hard. It just means that for 1 second, you might just say, hey, how can I be a day maker in someone else's life today?
Yeah.
So,
Great wisdom, great takeaway. So thank you and Shauna for that.
of course. And thank you for spreading the word and doing all the wonderful things that you do. And it's wonderful to talk with somebody also who understands mental illness and understands the struggles and trying to destigmatize.
Thank you. And my last question for you, I'm going to give you an opportunity
Uh-huh.
to promote yourself a little bit. Tell us how individuals can get in touch with you, contract for your services, purchase your book, find out more about what Shauna is doing.
Yeah.
Tell our
So
audience how all that can happen.
the book is on Amazon, Barnes and Noble. Everything can be found on the website, which is soulwisesolutions.com. Soulwise Team is the handle for TikTok and Instagram. And just following some of Shauna's adventures, it's just been a really fun, joyous experience. And then also, we're both learning because I mean, she's new to technology and I'm not good at technology. So to watch how even the haters, even the back and forth on things like TikTok, how other people come in as community and say, hey, come on, like leave her alone. Why don't you try to understand? And then another person will say, but I don't get it. This makes no sense to me. And then another person will come back in and say, hey, just live and let live. And it's a beautiful way to kind of open the dialogue to all of us trying to figure it out and all of us taking our disparate life experiences and bringing them together and saying, how can we unfurl this into a much bigger, like universal teaching? And so I would love if people would join us on social media through Soulwise Team.
And I'll make sure all of your contact information gets in the episode notes when we go
Thank
live on
you.
YouTube and my other platforms. Kirsten, thank you so
Thank you.
much for a great conversation and for sharing your journey and Shauna with my audience today. I truly enjoyed the conversation, and I hope we can do this again sometime.
Oh, I would love that, Dave. And thank you for you are such a good-hearted soul. And I just really appreciate being able to have these conversations with people who get it.
Thank you. And with
Yeah.
that's a wrap on another episode of the Teaching Journeys podcast. I'm your host, Dave Roberts, wishing you peace.